Welcome to the Read Down, your weekly progressive political hot take by the Stonewall Democratic Club. I'm Alex Mohajer, and on this week's episode, an end to a 20-year war is in sight. We're going to talk about the shooting that's happened of another young man of color in Minneapolis as the Derek Chauvin trial continues just 10 miles away. And we're going to talk about all of today's top headlines with our very special guest, Bryan. All of this and more on the Read Down. Thank you so much for joining the Read Down this evening by the Stonewall Democratic Club. I am so pleased to be joined this week by my co-hosts. First and foremost, Ebony Murphy-Root.
Happy Tuesday, Stonewall family.
Come on, Stonewall fam. How's it going, Ebony?
It's going. It's another week in America. Let's talk about it.
Another week in America. Let's chat. And our lovely co-host, Jonathan Welch, is here.
Good evening.
How's it going, Jonathan?
Oh, it's just great. Just great. It's great to see you guys. Great to be with you.
And we've got a very special guest this week. He is the Stonewall endorsed candidate in the race for California State Assembly in the 54th Assembly District. We are so pleased he's joining us. Please welcome to the program, Bryan.
Grateful to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
How's the race going, Isaac?
It's going. We've got just over 30 days to the primary, but if we push as hard as we can, I think we might be able to end it there.
Good. We're very excited, and we're very excited to support you. And we've got a lot of headlines and news to cover, so we're glad that you're here with us to cover some of them with us on the Read Down. And right now, we're going to go into our first section of the broadcast. It's the weekly Read Down. This is where we cover all of the latest top topics, current events, and news headlines. And first and foremost, at the top of our minds and hearts is the shooting of 20-year-old Daunte Wright in Brooklyn Park, Minneapolis, just 10 miles away from the Derek Chauvin murder trial, where the Derek Chauvin murder trial of George Floyd is taking place. Daunte Wright, of course, pulled over because of expired plates and a hanging air freshener in his rearview mirror. He was killed by an officer who apparently, the story goes, mistook her gun for a taser. What are your guys' thoughts as we start to learn more about this? And I'd like to start with our guest, Isaac.
I mean, my first thought is heartbreaking. And my second thought is unsurprising. We have not moved nearly as far as we need to go. The fact that it happened in Minneapolis and Minnesota, I think, is a symbolic wake up for our country, right? We thought that all of the marching and protesting last year resulted in tangible change, and some of it has. But when you have the same kind of occurrence happen in the same city while the trial's going on for the murder of George Floyd, it just shows us how much more work we've got to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And, right-wing media is already seizing on this as being an issue of, well, he had warrants for his arrest. And Ebony, I want to ask you about this. So it turns out in October 2019, Daunte Wright, who was a minor at the time, smoked a single joint of weed and was cited by the police for it. It was a petty misdemeanor for which he pled guilty and was charged a fine of $75 plus $81 in fees. He was put on a payment plan that was then put into collections during the pandemic, and a warrant was then issued for his arrest. So that's the warrant that we're talking about. And we heard some news today that the notice of this warrant, the notice that these payments were due, didn't even go to the proper address. And then, of course, he was pulled over because of a air freshener hanging from his rearview mirror. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, any friends who are watching know that I'm someone who throughout my 20s had lots of traffic violation run-ins with the police. And so when I think of someone at 20 years old, think of how young that is. 20 years old, driving the car your parents bought you, trying to get your life together, and then your life ends over some very small municipal violation. It's really disappointing. It's really upsetting. We know that these small towns use municipal violations to generate funds because of the way taxes work in small towns. And we know that young people, young folks of color, working class people, that these municipal fines are sort of built on their backs. And I have lots of issues with the way this works in America. There was a huge profile in Mother Jones a few years ago about how small towns such as Ferguson, such as the outer rings of Hartford, Connecticut, where I'm from, towns like East Hartford and Manchester use these municipal fines to fund schools, right? Because our taxes aren't funded. And so we see multiple issues intersecting here. But all I can really think of is a young man at 20 whose life is ended, and a small child who's, about a year old, who's lost a father. And that is simply devastating to me and unacceptable.
Yeah, and Jonathan, the police chief in this town, Brooklyn Park, Minneapolis, in Minnesota rather, gave a pretty weak explanation as to what happened, and it isn't really satisfying people. I want to play some video for you of the police chief. I believe his name is Tim Gannard, talking about how the police officer who discharged her weapon meant to fire her taser instead. Let's play that video and get Jonathan's reaction.
As you can hear, the officer, while struggling with Mr. Wright, shouts, "Taser, taser," several times. That is part of the officer's training prior to deploying a taser, which is a less lethal device. That is done to make her partners aware, as well as the subject, that a taser deployment will be imminent. During this encounter, however, the officer drew their handgun instead of their taser. For informational purposes, we train with our handguns on our dominant side and our taser on our weak side. So if you're right-handed, you carry your firearm on your right side and you carry your taser on the left. This is done purposefully and is trained. As I watch the video and listen to the officer's commands, it is my belief that the officer had the intention to deploy their taser, but instead shot Mr. Wright with a single bullet. This appears to me, from what I viewed and the officer's reaction in distress immediately after, that this was an accidental discharge that resulted in the tragic death of Mr. Wright.
An accidental discharge. Jonathan, what are your thoughts on this? Because, if an officer is so unable to differentiate between her taser gun and her actual gun, should she even be in the force? I know that she resigned today, and so did the police chief in charge of this. What are your thoughts on that? And Annalisa Swan makes a great comment that we need to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act in the Senate. And will those kinds of reforms be enough, or do we need to start looking at how we fundamentally reshape our system of policing?
Yeah, I mean, it's so much. It's so much to recap there. Of course, you bring up that not only did she resign, but the police chief who we just saw resigned. They had another press conference with the acting police chief. He looked completely dumbfounded, didn't know what to do, obviously, or how to answer questions. I mean, if you're an officer, and I believe she was an officer for something like 29 years, and she couldn't differentiate between her taser and her gun in that moment, first of all, she was there to inflict harm. There's absolutely no reason why someone with a low-level violation, a warrant out on unpaid fines, needed to have any kind of violent interaction. And this kid he's 20 years old. We've talked about how he has a child, but he's still a kid. I mean, think back to when you were 20. He had to have been scared beyond belief, beyond anything that we can really comprehend. And this is what happened. Reforms like the Justice and Policing Act, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, are definitely very important, and we need to continue to push those pieces of legislation, but we also need to push things on state and local levels, because this isn't necessarily something that we can attack from a federal level, even though this is a problem that happens in municipalities all across the country. But this is something that we have to start tackling from within police forces and on a local level, where we can identify that there are police officers who perhaps have violent tendencies and don't have the decision-making wherewithal in order to be carrying weapons like that. And on top of that, why are officers carrying weapons of such high grade? Why have we turned the police into a military force where they look like, you know, they're patrolling in the middle of a war, when really they're supposed to be stewards of the community? That's just not who they are. So I think that it goes on multiple levels, guys, where we can't just have one piece of legislation fix everything. It certainly won't. This is going to have to be a problem that is addressed more locally. And when we say defund the police, what we mean by that is put those resources into creating a better, safer community where people aren't monitoring the community with weapons, just ready to go ahead and kill innocent civilians and people that they're supposed to protect. They were supposed to protect Daunte Wright. Like, these are people who are supposed to feel safe, and they don't feel safe, and with good reason.
54, California State Assembly. This is a really hot issue. The idea of what we do with police services that address root problems and achieve more racial equity for Black and brown communities. What are your thoughts as a candidate on this? And what would you like to see happen here in Los Angeles County and then more broadly across the state of California that addresses this issue?
Yeah, as a candidate, this is a very interesting issue because I've heard on more than one occasion that I have there are others in this race who would seek to use my positionality on this issue against me to scare folks, right? Because the defund the police slogan became scary. Reimagining policing, right? Reinvesting our resources, social equity, social justice. None of these words should be scary. And we've done this before in Los Angeles. In LA, we passed Measure J. And we called it Measure J for a reason. It was Measure Justice. And it was a way to look at the resources we were spending in the county. $36 billion county, the 10th largest economy in the world, and right size it for our community, to call for 10% of unrestricted county revenues to go towards care and opportunity. That's hundreds of millions of dollars a year to build out infrastructures rooted in safety and well-being. 70% of those who are incarcerated in our county jail suffer from a mental or physical ailment. Daunte was just past being someone who could have been charged as a youthful offender, and youth in LA County, we spend over $400,000 per year per young person to incarcerate them. All of these resources need to be questioned because there are other ways we can build up opportunity for our communities. And when you build up opportunity, when people are not hungry, right? When people don't live in food deserts, when grocery stores are not closing in our neighborhoods, when people have education, access to affordable health care, public health infrastructure, when you have all of the community needs that you need, economic mobility and opportunity, that's how you build community safety. But we're not funding those things. We're funding things that result in choosing between a taser and a gun for a minor traffic violation, neither of which should have ever been deployed, not ever. And we've got to address some of the cultural barriers between our communities, because when Daunte said, "Am I in trouble?" and they said, "We'll tell you when you get out," as opposed to telling him exactly what's going on, that's when the escalation already started and you knew something was tragic. And the fact that his mother had to hear that on his cell phone, we owe his family so much. And the biggest thing we owe them is to change policy and to put people in positions to change policy. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is a great step at the federal level. It withholds dollars if you don't have good behavior. It incentivizes departments to behave better, but we can do much, much more at the city, the county, and the state level. The state of California still spends $13 billion a year plus on just state corrections expenditures. We allocated in Measure H $1 billion over 10 years to fight homelessness in LA. We spend $1.8 billion every year on LAPD. And we've seen how that imbalance happens in situations like what we saw in Echo Park. We have so much further to go, but the way we get there is to stay engaged, stay organized, put the right people in office, and not just care when we see a tragedy. Because if that happens, then these tragedies will never stop happening.
Yeah, Jonathan, thoughts?
Yeah, I just have a quick thought, and talking with Isaac, talking about this idea of reimagining and reinventing the police. We've come to a place where really it's about how police are looking at the community. The individuals who are representing the police force are looking at the communities that they serve. They don't necessarily look at it as service. They don't look at it as assisting the community, as helping to keep peace in the community. They see it as policing, militarizing, like having a sense of ownership over people. And that is something that's just so systematically ingrained. And for lack of a better word, guys, it's really fucked. And I don't know how we get past that, except to add some kind of intense psychological screening for any candidates that are applying to the police force. And that's part of that reimagination, right? To actually get counselors to come in and really go through someone's intellectual profile and see if they have the emotional and empathetic capacity to actually be an effective public safety officer versus a police presence.
One thing I saw today is not a single police officer on that force lives in that community. So they live in the outer, wealthier suburbs, but not a single one on that force lives in that community. So you have people coming from the outside and they see a community that maybe doesn't look like a suburb and they're afraid. Right. And that is so much a part of the issue. You see a 20-year-old kid wearing some, I don't even know what brands kids wear nowadays, but they look scary, right? As opposed to the local kids in your suburban neighborhood wearing what they wear. And that is so much a part of the issue. It's disappointing, and we have to put in some incentives to recruit folks from the communities and ask police people to move to the communities in which they want to work.
We also have to, we've got to think about the fact that not every crisis requires a badge and a gun either. We need alternative crisis response models. In fact, many normal traffic stops don't require a badge and a gun or a taser, quite frankly. And the way to invest in those alternative response models is to build them out and fund them. We have the Crisis Act, for example, in the state legislature. It was put on there by then Assembly member Sidney Kamlager, and it's sitting idly by because last year it made it all the way to the governor's desk and didn't get signed. It would invest resources in building out alternative crisis response models for things that require a different type of approach. And so we have to be willing to push and think beyond kind of this war rhetoric between our law enforcement agencies and our communities, and really start thinking about how we build opportunity, well-being in approaches rooted in health.
Right. And, there's this, I talk about this case study. There's a town actually in Minnesota, Little Falls, Minnesota, that a few years ago, they decided to stop criminalizing drug addiction and drug-related cases. And instead, they just took a very small amount of state allocated funding, and they poured all of that money into getting people with drug addiction or drug-related charges into rehabilitation programs instead of incarcerating them. And this town, it's a small case study, but I think it's very, very important to note. They were able to eradicate their opioid crisis in 6 months. This was a town that was being overtaken by the opioid crisis. And it's a little bit of a comparison. It's not exactly the same comparison, but my ultimate point is that when you take money meant towards criminalizing and overly policing and punishing and shaming people who are struggling or who are marginalized communities or vulnerable communities, and you reallocate it into solving problems that those communities face by rehabilitating those communities, like allocating funding for education, for drug and alcohol rehabilitation, for community-based services, what you see is that a lot of the root problems that face those communities are alleviated, and there's not a need for a surveillance police state to be cracking down on these communities and shooting a young 20-year-old boy because what? So, I think there are case studies on point that suggest that reallocating funding towards more community-based services, care-based services for communities help those communities thrive. And I think it's something that we should be definitely looking at more intensively. And you know, Ebony, right now the George Floyd's killer, Derek Chauvin, the officer who's standing trial for murder in Minneapolis, that trial is going on 10 miles away from where this shooting of Dante Wright took place. And have you been keeping up with the trial? What are your thoughts as we go into the third week? I know that the defense just started their case in chief today. And what are your thoughts as we get into that?
Yeah, I've been protecting my own sanity, but I have been tuning in because I think it's important to. What it speaks to me, that another shooting could take place 10 miles away, is an utter lack of care for the communities that were really traumatized by having to watch that. And for the rest of us who've all been like traumatized in a secondary way from having to watch that. So you would think that everybody would sort of like be even more careful in doing their work and interacting with communities. But no, we see that that is not the case, that there has been no additional care taken in interacting with these communities. And, it makes me even more fearful of interacting with the police. And I think that that's what some of our, you know, perhaps white middle-class suburban friends don't necessarily understand about the interactions that the rest of us have with the police. They are not the same, right? The last time I got pulled over, which was just about a year ago, I was in Compton. I was on my way to a Tom Steyer event. I was super excited. You know, I'm such a good citizen. And the cop asked me if I was on probation or parole, which I'm not. And he also asked me if I live in my car. Now, I know I have a messy car. Everyone knows this. But like, if I was, would that affect how I was treated? And I'm wondering, for all the people who are on probation or parole and are not coming from work and aren't on their way to a presidential event, how are they being treated when they interact with the police? So I think there are some race, class, gender, what car you drive intersections that, you know, our white middle class friends who want to be allies don't necessarily know what it's like. And for all the people who have to live in Minneapolis, the Black folks, the brown folks, AAPI folks who, you know, don't necessarily have the class privilege to stand up for themselves in these situations, I really just hope that they are being able to keep their hearts safe and maintain some sanity.
It's difficult to watch for sure. I mean, I've been watching every single day. I've been trying to keep up with it. I acknowledge that it's traumatic for a lot of people. And I've been trying to carry my own weight in watching it. And I have been watching the prosecution wrapped up their case in chief today, and they did a fantastic job of rebutting a lot of what the defense is clearly going to argue in their defense of Derek Chauvin. They're clearly going to argue that he died of a fentanyl overdose, that he had a pre-existing condition, that his heart gave out. That's the reason he died, because all they've got to do is they've got to raise a reasonable doubt that'll get Derek Chauvin off. But the prosecution has been really incredible. I want to play a little bit of video for you. This is Dr. Tobin talking about how there's no possible way that a fentanyl overdose could be the cause of death here. And I want to play that for you now and get Jonathan's reaction.
The question is, fentanyl can also cause a death as a result of low oxygen.
Well, your answer is yes, but only in part.
Fair enough, thanks.
Briefly.
Just one. Mr. Nelson brought up again fentanyl as a cause of death.
Yes.
Doctor, you're familiar with the way people die from fentanyl.
Yes, very.
Do they or do they not go into a coma before they die from a fentanyl overdose?
Yes, they will.
Was Mr. Floyd ever in a coma?
No.
Thank you, Dr.
We got the prosecutor, we got police members of the police force saying that this was a lawful use of force, that it was not appeared to be inappropriate. Jonathan, what do you think of these clips and what the prosecution has done in advance of the defense case in chief?
I'm going to get a little foul-mouthed because whenever I see Eric Nelson, I just think of him as like the dickhead dad on some Hulu series who's later revealed to be like some kind of evil monster. He just, every time I see his face, that's just what I think. He just, to me, just exudes like ickiness. And so, of course, he's Derek Chauvin's attorney. So everybody has the right to a good defense attorney in this country. and he's certainly doing his best to frame this differently than the way it happened. You know, looking at that particular medical expert, what struck me was, and I'm not sure if it was actually this one, it may have been someone else who they called onto the stand, who said that if George Floyd were resting comfortably under the knee of Derek Chauvin, then and weren't resisting, then he wouldn't have so many physical effects that led to his death, which makes absolutely no sense at all, because when you're in a position like that, why would you rest comfortably? And that's not even an option for you when you're pressed up against the pavement for no reason. You're fighting for your life. What struck me the most is when I'm hearing medical experts called by the prosecution prior to the prosecution closing their side of the case, their argument today, and all of those people basically unequivocally saying that there is no reason that this man would have died on that day if not for the interaction of Officer Chauvin and the Minneapolis Police Department. If not for the encounters that he had, he would not have died. They hammered that home over and over and over again, and I think that's vitally important for the jury. So I think what we're going to see now that the defense is up and the defense is framing their case is just trying to blame it on anything but. And it's one of those things where you have this argument of that is just so simple that the prosecution put forward versus something that's really trying to convolute it and potentially confuse the jurors. So it's my hope that that rock solid case by the prosecution is something that's going to just kind of go through the jurors' heads as we proceed throughout the trial, because even watching it as just a viewer out here, it's very hard to get past the fact that like it just wouldn't have happened if not for the police.
Yeah, we got some good comments on this. Let's see. Elizabeth Henderson saying, do you think the defense is making a good case, Alex? I think that what the prosecution is doing is that they are shutting down any argument that the defense makes. And I actually don't think that the defense is a very good one. It's actually sort of insidious. What they're actually doing is they're trying to create cast a character aspersion onto George Floyd and say that he's a drug addict and therefore he must be asking for it. Kelsey, great point. What I am hearing is their argument is a disabled person or people with ailments like me are expendable and don't have rights. Even if a person is a criminal, I'm not saying George Floyd was a criminal. I'm saying even if they're a criminal, the police still have to protect them. You don't kill them or shoot them or put your knee on their neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. So I think the defense isn't doing themselves a service here because the prosecution has done such a good job of rebutting their case. What do you think of the Derek Chauvin trial, Isaac, as we go into the third week?
Yeah, no, I think Alex, you made a good point. You know, when you are Black in this country, or if you're LGBTQ, if you're API, if you're anyone who's been pushed to the margins and you have an encounter with law enforcement, you die 2 deaths. One, when you are literally killed, and the second, your character, your name, your reputation. And that's what's happened to George Floyd. It's what they're trying to do to Dante, right? Over smoking weed one time when he was a kid. First of all, we should legalize cannabis everywhere in this country. And then let everybody out who's arrested for a cannabis arrest everywhere in the country. Especially in states where we are building a legal industry. At the same time, we have folks incarcerated for this. But this trial is heartbreaking because what the defense is trying to do is pretend like we didn't see what we saw. We saw a murder. The world saw a murder. We know how he died. When we saw the autopsy, we were not surprised. We don't need an expert to tell us that. Although in a trial, I understand why it's necessary. But what really makes me angry, frustrated, upset, pushes me to do more is that what if we hadn't seen it? What if it wasn't recorded on a cell phone? These kinds of murders happen all the time and we don't see them. And they go unnoticed and names are forgotten. We need to get rid of qualified immunity as well, not just at the federal level, but here in the state of California. This trial is a reminder of something we've seen for over 400 years now in this country. And it's a reminder that if we ever stop pushing for justice, the backfire is lethal.
Yeah, you know, when we talk about qualified immunity, I'm so glad that you brought that up. In any other industry, profession that requires some sort of license or proof that you are qualified to do your job, if you're a doctor and you prescribe someone a medication that kills them, or you engage in some sort of medical malpractice and it ends up killing somebody, you lose your license and you are punished and you are not allowed to practice that profession anymore, and you face criminal charges and civil charges for failing to live up to your standard, your duty of care to those people who rely on you. And so qualified immunity is one of the most, for police officers particularly, is one of the more atrocious legal principles. And I am really, really in agreement with you that it needs to end. And I do have a trigger warning for you guys. I do want to play you a little bit of testimony from Philonise Floyd. He is George Floyd's brother. I think that this was worthy of sharing with you because the world needs to hear it. And I'd like to respond. I'd like for us all to remember George Floyd in this way. In Minnesota, there's something called the spark of life doctrine, which allows attorneys in the prosecution to talk about the victim's character and talk about it as a part of their case in chief. And the prosecution did just that. And I'd like to play that for you guys now.
And what's his daughter's name?
Gianna.
And how old is she now?
7.
Sir, could you please, for the jury, describe George Floyd's relationship with his mother?
Oh, it was one of a kind. George, he would always be up on our mom. He was a big mama's boy. I cry a lot, but George, he loved his mom. He will always just be up on her. And you know, every mother loves all of her kids, but it was so unique how they were with each other. He would lay up on her in the fetus position like he was still in a womb. I would see him every day, and I'd say, period. I'd say period because we called him Perry instead of George. And he would always say, hold on, let me kiss mama before I come over there. And being around him, he showed us like how to treat our mom and how to respect our mom. He loved her so dearly. And when George, he had found out that my mom was passing because she had to stay with us for hospice, and he was talking to her over the phone, but she perished before he even came down here. So that right there, it hurt him a lot. And when we went to the funeral, it's just George just sat there at the casket over and over again. He would just say, mama, mama, over and over again.
So, you know, he was somebody's son, and that leaves me at a loss. And he was somebody's son, and I'm hoping that we get justice for George Floyd. So we'll keep our eyes on that. We know that there will be a closing argument in that case on Monday. So we're hoping that we get some justice for George Floyd. In other national news, a little change of scenery, Biden is announcing today that President Biden will withdraw troops from Afghanistan by September 11th of this year, which is, you know, it's a 20-year long war, and we're already getting Republican pushback. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is slamming the plan. He's saying even though the last president talked about doing the same, the guy with whose name we do not speak, that this is reckless and there's no plan. I'd like to turn to Jonathan. Jonathan, what are your thoughts? This war has been going on forever. Is this welcome news for you?
Yeah, I graduated high school 20 years ago. Okay, me and the people who I grew up with, like, we entered into the situation from a very peaceful world post 9/11, realizing that it's our generation that's going to be on the chopping block here to get into the military, to go out there and fight a war that seemed completely senseless. I mean, we were basically just tracing a terrorist organization back to a nation and creating a war where there didn't have to be a war, and then creating military occupation where there didn't have to be military occupation. So this is something that should have been done a long time ago. You don't stabilize a region like this, this way. You need to eventually get out of these countries. So it is well overdue. We continue to spend resources and put lives at risk by being out in a country where we really don't belong. So it's long overdue. And I think that it's very appropriate that President Biden's doing this with a plan in place. Before, it was, Donald Trump just kind of wanted to have it be done so that people would like him more. And that's certainly not the reason to do anything. So I have a lot of faith in our current president and this plan.
What? You've got faith that he's going to do what he says he does? Shocker. We had so many years where that didn't happen. Isaac, do you remember where you were? Because if this happens by September 11th of this year, it'll be exactly 20 years to the day of 9/11. Do you remember where you were when 9/11 happened? And what are your thoughts on this withdrawal plan?
Yeah, absolutely. I look older than I am. That's what happens when you shave your head and grow a beard. I was in fourth grade.
I hate you.
I was in class. I remember going home. I remember everybody in class crying. I had a friend in class who was uncle was a pilot who was supposed to be flying one of those planes. And I remember us talking about it in fourth grade, but at such a high level, right? That's not one of those things. It's not a traditional topic for a fourth grade classroom, but we had to talk about it. We had to talk about it. When we went home, we talked about it. My older brother, Brad, he served 2 tours in this war. A lot of people gave a lot in this war, and what we got back for it was just more hate across the world, and not unjustly so. We have earned some of it. We do not have to be the world's occupying force. We definitely do not. And the money we spend on our military industrial complex, those are resources that could be used to promote opportunity and well-being home and abroad. So we have to think differently. Why do we always seem to find money for the things that kill people? We do it in our local policy, our municipal policy, and we do it in our global policy. I'm pleased to see this withdrawal from President Biden. I'm glad to have a president who means what they say, who does what they say. In any way that we can support, I think we all need to find ways to push this administration to continue to be bold and then back it up with real action.
Yeah, and Ebony, Isaac makes a great point, and it's the amount of spending that goes into the industrial military complex that is spent on wars. And then the Republican Party particularly is just aghast at the price tag of an infrastructure bill that tackles climate change and jobs, or just aghast at some of the more progressive policy proposals of people in the Democratic Party trying to further, the lives of everyday Americans. What are your thoughts on this and on where we could redirect some of that spending?
The GOP right now, they're just a party of trolls, right? Anything that would benefit the people, they are offended at, right? Like funding schools, no. War. So I don't remember who it was, which of the congressional representatives, but I don't remember. But the point was that everything is infrastructure, right? Building schools is infrastructure. Healthcare is infrastructure, right? Like building a society, that's what we want our elected officials to do, not just engage in war. And so I'm all for that, right? We have so much we could do to build up the next generation, right? And education costs a lot of money. Like, I know everyone wants to do education on the cheap, and every time I get the chance, I say that a good education takes time and money, and there's no way to do it on the cheap. There's no way to do it with bubble tests. There's no way to do it with building micro schools or, just invest in the public schools that we have, invest in the teachers that we have. There's not another teaching force. There's not another random generation of kids that we have. We have this generation of kids. We need to educate this generation of kids, and it takes resources, and all these resources that we've wasted really for the last 20 years of war. All four of us here are adults, no matter how old we are. For the past 20 years of our lives, our country has invested in war elsewhere. What would it look like to invest in society here for the next 20 years at that rate? Like when we're talking about reimagining, oh my gosh, reimagine if we could invest in ourselves. I can't even imagine what that would look like.
Well, Isaac was in 4th grade on 9/11, and I'll hate you forever for that, Isaac. I was in 11th grade. Thank you very much. And I think
Jonathan hates
just as old as I look.
I do. I was going to say, I may be old enough to be Isaac's grandfather, but I'm really glad he's running for assembly, and I really enjoy his voice and input. So carry that torch.
Much more mature
I'm
than the rest
gonna
of
die
us.
soon, so there you go.
And we need people running for office. This is part of why Isaac is so exciting for me as a candidate.
Yeah.
We need people who were in 4th grade in 9/11. We need somebody to stand up and say, hey, this has been my entire life, right?
Yes.
It's important to have that viewpoint because we're like all old millennials, we're grizzled, but for Isaac to say that, I think everybody's like, whoa, like that means something to have that voice of someone under 30 saying, hey, like our society needs to make better choices. So thank you, Isaac, for standing up and not, waiting your turn, right? And saying now's the time to stand up and make these points that you're making in many different Dem clubs and many different settings. Everyone that I talked to was just really impressed with the way that you're conducting yourself with kindness and empathy and just standing up for your journey and the life that you've lived. It's really impressive for me as a middle school teacher to see a young person like acting the way you are.
Hear, hear. And we've got Isaac for just a couple more minutes. I'm aware of your time, Isaac. I want to get your thoughts on President Biden, who just announced that he's going to appoint a commission to determine whether there are reforms that should be made to the Supreme Court and potentially expanding the Supreme Court, adding justices to the Supreme Court. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's great political strategy. It's good thinking. I mean, the reality is we're having this conversation because the Republican Party blocked Merrick Garland's appointment, overrid the constitutional powers that President Obama had, not just with that appointment, but in courts up and down the country, right, on all levels. And that kind of changing of the rules and reshaping of the landscape is something I think Democrats have to be willing to do when we're in power, to have conversations about the intent and the purpose of these bodies, these institutions, and whether they're fulfilling that. And so I think it's worth having a commission, right? Any kind of commission, any kind of task force, any kind of study, that's not action, right? That's the start of a conversation. And if the commission finds it's not feasible, it's not pragmatic, it's too out of line with historic norms, with the Constitution, with many other things, then that's okay. But if the commission makes a compelling argument for the country, I think it's something to continue talking about further. But the Supreme Court and any level of government can't change the rules to be obstruction just because a black man or a black woman or a black person becomes president, right? Or somebody who hasn't historically had access to that kind of power. And that's what we saw during the Obama years. And it's time to correct that. We saw a backlash, and now it's time for the Biden administration to correct as much as they can.
Isaac, we know you've got to go. Really quickly before you do, can you let us know where we can go to support you and support your campaign for the 54th Assembly District in your upcoming election?
Absolutely. You can go to IsaacBryan4ca.com. You can follow me on social media at IB2_real. Or you can go anywhere that Ebony Murphy-Root is, because I will be there. I will absolutely be there. This campaign is about a month out before the primary. Ballots are going to get dropped in about a week. Fill out your ballot, mail it in, take it to a drop-off center. Call your friends, call your family, your neighbors, your roommates, and ask them to do it too. They're counting on special elections having a very low turnout. And low turnout doesn't benefit candidates who are in 4th grade during 9/11. But it does if the community shows up, right? If the community shows up, that's a new voting base. If the community is active and engaged, like I know the 54th is, we can do something special. And I'm honored to have the endorsement of the Stonewall Democratic Club, the first major Democratic club to get involved in this race. If we do this, it is because we moved in solidarity, and I'm grateful for you.
And we're honored to endorse you. Thank you so much, everyone. This has been Isaac Bryan, candidate for Assembly District 54 in the upcoming California State Assembly race. Thank you so much for joining us. Isaac, we know you've got a heart out, and hopefully you'll come visit us again when you're elected. Thanks, Isaac.
Thanks, Isaac.
Oh, what a joy. What a good guy. It's so intelligent, so well-spoken, so mature.
What a great
more
kid.
to cover, guys. But Jonathan, what are your thoughts on this possible expansion of the Supreme Court? I know that progressives believe this will not solve a thing, only helps the right. Do you really understand that argument? Because I'm a little confused by it.
So I think it's about the commission. The commission itself seems a little, it's a little muddied because there are 36 people on this commission, and it's made up of a number of liberals, progressives, and also conservatives. You know, these people who have been fighting with the Heritage Foundation for the past few decades to do exactly what Republicans have done to the court system, which is to just get their claws on it. And as you saw with Mitch McConnell, filling all of these seats when he didn't necessarily have the authority to do so, but blocking our ability to fill the seats when President Obama was in office. So it's really been this decades-long pursuit to remake the judiciary in this super conservative Reagan-esque vision of how things are supposed to be. So now we're taking a look at that. We're taking a look at basically their strategy, their blueprint, and trying to change the judiciary. I mean, we saw that with President Biden's nominees to the federal courts. I think it was last week or the week before that we talked about it here on this show. Some very exciting, very young legal professionals who have diverse backgrounds. You know, I mean, you have public defenders, you have civil rights attorneys who are now going to be on the federal bench, and that's quite incredible. So, and they're young. They're like in their 40s, some are even in their 30s, which is just bonkers, but that's exactly what the right has done. So we have to balance it. So when it comes to this 36-person commission, it's going to be really hard to get a cohesive statement, I think, out of 36 people together who are, you know, coming from very vastly different backgrounds and different places and have different ideas as to what the end result is going to be. So I really do think that the issue is with this group. And maybe this group isn't necessarily to solve the problems as much as it is to highlight the problems with the current judiciary and the state of the judiciary, so that it will justify better action from the president and from the Senate if we have any holdouts on our side. I'm looking at you, Joe Manchin or Kirsten Sinema, who are reluctant to appoint more progressive judges to the bench.
Just pack the courts already. Just do it. The Republicans would have no problem doing the same thing. They stole Obama's nominee back in 2016, and you know they rammed through Amy Coney Barrett, and we need a response to that. That's my brazen, unfiltered opinion. Ebony, the CDC and the FDA, because we got a couple minutes before, just a minute before our read, they've asked that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine pause distribution. There are 6 people that have experienced blood clotting out of 8 million or so Johnson & Johnson vaccine doses administered. What are your thoughts on this? Can American media report on this in a way that just doesn't scare the hell out of everybody? And have we cared about the blood clots caused by birth control on a larger scale, or the blood clots caused by COVID?
Yes, this is what I'm hearing my friends say, that, you know, we've had reactions to other medications that are far more than 6 people. So no, I haven't heard the media reporting on this in a safe, calm way. It's a lot of fear mongering and like scare hyperbole. And it's going to make the people who are already vaccine reluctant say, see. So, you know, 6 people is 6 too many to pass away, but also we've saved so many more than that. Getting people to take the vaccine. So I hope that everybody can just be calm, take a breath, and move forward. They've already removed it from the market. Like this is science at work quickly, and maybe we could apply this 6 is too many to other societal happenings such as police shootings. We shall see.
Hear, hear. And frankly, it's like 6 people, the way that the media has reported on this, with the already existing vaccine reluctancy and fear, it's not really doing us a favor. Don't let this stop you from getting your vaccine, because we could be this summer having parties and getting together and going to concerts. Wouldn't that be nice, America? Get your vaccine when it's your turn. The eligibility is going to be opened up to all Americans April 19th, according to a new directive by the president. So we'll continue to keep our eyes on that. Thanks, Ebony, for that. And it is that time of the week, everybody. It's time to open up the library and read for filth. This is our chance to read for somebody, get on our soapbox, take a couple minutes, speak our mind, speak our truth, speak our piece. And it can be positive, it can be angry, it can be whatever you want it to be. I'd like to start this week with Jonathan Welch. Who would you like to read this week, Jonathan?
So I'm going to go positive with it. I did have a thought about the Johnson & Johnson thing, and I got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and I'm over a month out, and I'm doing okay. And yes, six people is too many to die, or to be harmed. But I'm looking forward to that vaccine being back out there and people safely getting it. So I just wanted to share that. But my thought this week is that more progressive policy is starting to take over, and I'm getting very, very excited about it. I'm seeing it not just in President Biden and some of the responses that he's had to current situations, but I'm also seeing it with Senator Warren, who started her new position as the chair of the subcommittee on banking today. So she was able to hold hearings specifically on student debt, which is something that we talk about a lot on this show. But between that and President Biden giving or starting to look at least the administration starting to look at student loan forgiveness, I really do think that that's coming, y'all. And I want to say that this never would have happened if not for activists who are actually doing the work. I did a master's project like 8 years ago, I think, on student debt and on the student debt crisis. And it was a thing back then that people were talking about, organizations were talking about it, the Occupy Wall Street movement was talking about it, but it didn't have the widespread support of lawmakers that it has now. So all of that work that we've been doing to push debt relief, to push some of these more progressive issues, to push climate change, to push police reform, to push all of these things, court reform, it's happening, and it's happening because we haven't stopped pushing. So for people out there who are a little bit discouraged by the political process, keep on going because it's happening. And I just get so excited when I see these little news stories break about even a hearing or even just an inkling that something might take place. It's just such a promising place to be. And I think that we really need to celebrate that that's where we are in this country right now, that we actually have the ability to make some serious changes, and that's happening right before our very eyes. So keep pushing. That's my statement for the week.
Thank you, Jonathan. And our guest this week, Isaac Bryan, was able to share with us before the broadcast his read for the week. And let's share that with you guys all now. Oh, no. I guess we don't have sound on that, but I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to upload that video to our YouTube page, youtube.com/Stonewall Democrats, so you can check out Isaac Bryan's extremely poignant, really heartfelt read for the week, talking about racial justice and what we need to do moving forward. So stay tuned for that. We'll post it to our Facebook page too. Ebony Murphy-Root, who would you like to read this week?
My read this week, and this is really picking up on the very end of Jonathan's read, are for the people still in the year of our whomever, 2021, during Ramadan, during the very beginning of the Biden era, think that it's possible to be apolitical. It is not. So if there's something that you care about, whether that's the environment or reproductive rights, or perhaps running for office, or perhaps getting on a local board or commission, or donating $5 or $10 to an inspiring young candidate who's running for office, you should do that. There are so many people still who say things like, well, I don't think I'm political, or just politics overwhelm me, or I don't really understand where to get involved. And I understand that. I was probably there 10 years ago. Just pick something, start showing up to meetings. You know what? Call your mayor, call your local congressman, call your state assembly person. It's their job to listen. Like Meghan McCain said, it's your job to listen to me. It's their job to listen to you. Someone will call you back. I just had every single one of my 8th graders email their congress people or local representatives, and almost every one of them heard back from someone, and they were very excited. So there's no, remaining on the sidelines. There's no politics overwhelm me, and I'm just going to pretend like none of this is happening. Everybody has to get involved, and in fact, it's part of your obligation as a citizen in maintaining democracy. So I get that not everybody's going to be a politics nerd like we all are, but it is your obligation to get involved in some form, whether that's tutoring kids or helping the homeless in some way. It really is your obligation. And I feel this deep in my old millennial bones to get involved. So there's no more, I'm not a political person. You must do something. This is your friendly 8th grade humanities teacher giving you a read this week.
Hey. Yes, Ebony, I love that so much. Thank you for your read. This week, I would like to read none other than my arch nemesis, Tucker Carlson, Fox News host, who appeared on his own show spreading something called, spreading a conspiracy theory known as let me get this right, the Great Replacement Theory. So I want to play for you a little bit of a clip of him talking about basically immigrants coming to take over white people, and that's the Democratic agenda. Here's Tucker Carlson.
Demographic change is the key to the Democratic Party's political ambitions. Let's say that again for emphasis because it is the secret to the entire immigration debate. Demographic change is the key to the Democratic Party's political ambitions. In order to win and maintain power, Democrats plan to change the population of the country. They're no longer trying to win you over with their program. They're obviously not trying to improve your life. They don't even really care about your vote anymore. Their goal is to make you irrelevant. That is provably true. And because it's true, it drives them absolutely crazy when you say it out loud. A hurt dog barks. They scream about how noting the obvious is immoral. You're a racist if you dare to repeat things that they themselves proudly say.
Yeah, you're a racist, Tucker. A big old racist. This is a crazy white nationalist, racist conspiracy theory. It's well known in white nationalist far-right circles. It's called the Great Replacement Theory. The Anti-Defamation League is calling on Tucker Carlson to be fired by Fox News because of this. So far, we're not hearing anything about this from Fox News in terms of if they're going to get rid of him. But this theory imagines that white people are intentionally being replaced by immigrants and minorities. And you know what, Tucker, you're a racist. But it's not the first time I've called you a racist. And here's a little bonus clip for all of our Stonewall Dems viewers and Read Down viewers of me telling Tucker Carlson he's a racist back in 2017.
Tucker Carlson, you were the editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller, which for a decade, called into question Barack Obama's legitimacy as a president based on his race. Racially motivated.
Of course it didn't say that, but I'm not running an anti-Semitic cult.
Journalist? Because you are you an illegitimate journalist? Because your very own website ran some pretty racist, terrible junk, and that didn't stop you, did it?
I couldn't help myself. Sorry. So Tucker Carlson, you're a shitbag and a racist, and you need to go. And just had to play that clip for you guys because it's holding up with time. So this has been the Read Down, your weekly progressive political hot take by the Stonewall Democratic Club. I've been joined this week by my fabulous co-hosts, Jonathan Welch and Ebony Murphy-Root. We'd like to thank our very special guest this week, Bryan, candidate for Assembly District 54 in the upcoming race for California State Assembly. Thank you so much, the Stonewall endorsed candidate. If you like this program, if you like this show, you can and want to learn more about the Stonewall Democratic Club, you can visit us at www.stonewalldems.org/join, where for only $25 a month, you too can become a member of this amazing organization and help us in our advocacy and electoral work and help people like Bryan get elected to office. We are stage managed. The show's stage managed by Peter Denz. We want to thank you, Peter, for all of your hard work and all of you guys for joining and watching the show. We'll be back next week, same time, same channel, Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining the Read Down, and have a fantastic rest